The courtroom was cloaked in silence, the kind that pressed down on everyone's chest and made each breath feel louder than it should. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of anxious bodies, and whispers floated like restless ghosts in the air. All eyes shifted toward the judge, who adjusted his glasses with a deliberate slowness, scanning the room as though he could see into each person's soul. The ticking of the old clock on the far wall echoed like a heartbeat, measuring the tension that seemed to thicken with every second. Even the faint rustle of papers from the clerk's desk felt like thunder in the stillness. A single cough from the gallery caused heads to turn sharply, silencing itself instantly under the crushing weight of expectation. The defendant sat rigid, hands clasped tightly, eyes darting between the floor and the judge's face. Across the room, the jury shifted uneasily, their expressions caught between curiosity and unease, as if they already sensed the storm about to break. The moment before the first words were spoken felt endless, an invisible wall holding everyone in suspense. And then, with a slow inhale that drew every gaze back to him, the judge leaned forward. The silence sharpened, waiting to be broken. The prosecutor rose from his seat with deliberate force, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. He clutched a thick file of evidence in one hand, its papers bristling like sharpened blades ready to be drawn. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly straight, but his eyes held something far more dangerous: determination. He cleared his throat, and the sound cut through the tension like a blade. The room hushed further, if such a thing was possible, as he stepped into the open space before the judge and jury. With a controlled breath, he opened the file, revealing neatly stacked documents, photographs, and sealed envelopes that hinted at secrets too heavy to remain hidden. His voice, when it came, carried both weight and sharpness. "Your Honor," he began, his gaze flickering toward the defense table, "the truth cannot be hidden any longer. What we present today will not only expose the lies but strip away the last defense of the accused." A murmur rippled through the gallery, a wave of hushed voices that rose and fell before the judge's gavel demanded silence again. The prosecutor didn't flinch, he had expected this reaction. Instead, he laid a photograph on the evidence table, sliding it forward for all to see. Gasps broke the quiet. For the first time, the defendant shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming on his brow. The prosecutor's lips curved into the faintest of grim smiles. The battle for truth had begun. The defense attorney remained seated as the prosecutor's words echoed through the courtroom. He did not rush, did not falter, his calmness was its own kind of weapon. Slowly, he leaned toward his client, whispering something only the two of them could hear. The defendant's tense shoulders loosened just slightly, as though the words had carried a hidden reassurance. Then, with a measured grace, the attorney stood. His movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, as though he wanted the jury and the spectators to feel the contrast between his composed confidence and the prosecutor's fiery urgency. Adjusting his cufflinks, he turned toward the judge, his voice smooth and steady when it finally broke the silence. "Your Honor," he began, his tone respectful yet edged with conviction, "what you just heard is not truth, but performance. The prosecution wants you to believe that assumption is evidence, that suspicion is fact. But the law demands more than smoke and shadows, it demands proof." He let the words hang in the air, pacing slowly before the jury box. His eyes swept across each juror's face, pausing long enough to make them feel seen. "And proof, ladies and gentlemen, is what we will reveal, or rather, the lack of it." He returned his gaze toward the prosecutor's table, meeting his rival's stare without flinching. A faint smile tugged at his lips, one that seemed to say, "You may have started strong, but this battlefield belongs to me now." The tension in the courtroom shifted, subtle but undeniable. The game of truth had indeed just begun. All eyes followed as the witness rose from the benches. Their steps were hesitant, each one echoing against the polished wooden floor. The sound seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Clutching their hands tightly together, they moved toward the stand, their face pale, their eyes darting nervously between the judge and the crowd. The clerk approached, holding out the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" I do," the witness stammered, their trembling voice barely audible. Seated now, the witness shifted uncomfortably, fingers tapping against the wood of the stand. The prosecutor stepped forward first, his tone firm but deceptively gentle. "Please state your name for the record." The words came out shaky, followed by silence so deep it felt as though the entire room leaned closer, straining to hear. The witness swallowed hard before continuing, "I was there, the night it happened." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a restless murmur. The judge's gavel slammed down. Order. This courtroom will have order. But the spell had already been cast. The witness's trembling words carried something more powerful than the gavel's strike, secrets that no one expected, secrets that could tip the scales of justice in an instant. The defense attorney leaned forward sharply, sensing danger. The prosecutor, meanwhile, straightened with renewed vigor. And the jury, their faces betrayed it all: shock, curiosity, and the dawning realization that the truth was about to change everything. The words of the witness hung in the air like a thunderclap, and before the silence could settle, the prosecutor struck. With practiced precision, he pulled a sealed envelope from his file and held it aloft for all to see. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he announced, his voice booming with confidence, "this document confirms what the witness has just stated. It is undeniable proof." Gasps erupted across the gallery, sharp and unrestrained. Some leaned forward, desperate to catch a glimpse of the evidence. Others covered their mouths, their whispers tumbling into a tide of disbelief. The atmosphere turned electric, thick with shock and anticipation. The defense attorney shot up from his chair, his voice slicing through the uproar. "Objection. This is theatrics, not evidence. The prosecution is attempting to sway the jury with spectacle." But the prosecutor was ready. He strode confidently to the clerk's desk, slamming the envelope down. "This is no performance, Your Honor. This is the truth they have tried to bury." The judge's gavel pounded again, demanding silence, yet even he could not mask the slight widening of his eyes. Something in that envelope carried weight, perhaps enough to shatter the defense's careful composure. On the witness stand, the trembling figure avoided everyone's gaze, as if the truth now exposed had lifted a burden and yet unleashed a storm. The defendant shifted uneasily, his jaw clenched, sweat forming at his temple. The gallery leaned closer, the jury exchanged wary glances, and the air vibrated with one undeniable reality: the case had just turned in a direction no one could ignore. The courtroom had erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, gasps spilling like waves against the walls, and whispers rising into an uncontrollable hum. The revelation had shattered the fragile order, and the weight of it pressed down on everyone present. Then, crack, the judge's gavel slammed against the block with a force that made even the boldest spectator flinch. "Order," his voice thundered, echoing through the chamber. "This courtroom will come to order immediately." The murmurs died into silence, though the tension remained like static in the air. Jurors sat frozen, their hands gripping the edges of their seats. The defendant's face had turned pale, his eyes darting between his attorney and the witness stand, as though searching for an escape that didn't exist. The judge's gaze swept the room, stern and unyielding. His lips pressed into a thin line, but the sharpness in his eyes betrayed the weight of what had just been unveiled. "If there is another outburst," he warned, "I will clear this courtroom." For a heartbeat, no one dared to move. The defense attorney rose slowly, attempting to mask his unease with dignity, but even his voice carried a crack of strain as he addressed the bench. "Your Honor, we must be careful not to let shock outweigh justice." The judge's eyes narrowed, his gavel resting in his hand like a weapon ready to strike again. "Justice," he said, his tone cutting, "is precisely why we are here. And justice will not be delayed." A chill swept through the room. Every face, jury, gallery, counsel, and accused, reflected the same truth: the trial was no longer just a legal battle. It was a storm, and no one could predict who would stand when it passed. The stillness after the judge's command was fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. Everyone sat stiff, bracing for what would come next. Then, just as the prosecutor prepared to continue, the witness shifted in the chair, their trembling hands gripping the edge of the stand. I can't stay silent anymore," the witness blurted out, their voice cracking with desperation. "There's something else you need to know." A ripple of shock ran through the room. The prosecutor froze mid-step, and the defense attorney's eyes narrowed, sensing both danger and opportunity. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" he demanded. The witness inhaled shakily, then pointed directly at the defendant. He wasn't alone that night. Gasps tore through the gallery, louder than before, as the jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances. The defendant's face drained of color, his lips parting in disbelief. His lawyer immediately rose, objecting furiously, "Your Honor, this testimony is beyond the scope." But the damage was done. The words hung in the air, poisonous and undeniable. The witness's voice strengthened as if a dam had broken. "There was someone else there. Someone helping him, and I can prove it." The entire courtroom erupted. The gavel slammed again, but this time even the judge's commanding voice struggled to tame the storm. The case, which had seemed to tilt one way only moments before, was now hurled into chaos. New questions clawed at everyone's mind. Who was the second person? Were they in the room right now? And if this was true, how deep did the deception go? The storm of voices crashed against the courtroom walls until the judge's gavel fell again, harder than before. Crack! The sound demanded silence, and slowly, like waves receding, the uproar subsided. Everyone's eyes fixed on the bench. The judge leaned forward, his face carved with gravity, his tone steady but heavy with the weight of justice. This court has heard enough. The defendant sat rigid, his eyes wide, sweat rolling down his temple. His attorney whispered urgently, but the man no longer seemed to hear. The jury watched with unreadable expressions, though their tense posture betrayed the verdict already written in their minds. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze cutting across the courtroom, prosecutor, defense, witness, and gallery alike. This trial has revealed not only the actions of the accused but the lengths to which truth can be buried. Yet truth has a way of forcing its way into the light. A hush so complete filled the room that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. Then the judge's words fell, sharp and final. This court finds the defendant guilty. The words struck like thunder. Gasps echoed, some in relief, others in shock. The defendant's head fell into his hands, his body trembling as the gavel slammed one last time. The prosecutor let out the breath he had been holding, his eyes closing in quiet victory. Across the room, the defense attorney sank slowly into his chair, shoulders heavy with defeat. The witness wept softly, the burden of silence finally lifted. The jurors exchanged weary glances, knowing they had been part of something larger than themselves. As the bailiff stepped forward to escort the convicted man away, the gallery erupted once more, some in cries of outrage, others in cheers of justice. But above it all, the judge's voice lingered in memory, echoing like a verdict beyond the walls. Truth will always demand to be heard.